this is Gretchen Menn for acoustic guitar, and today we're going to be talking about hybrid picking, which is the simultaneous use of the flat pick and the fingers. It's used across a huge variety of styles, and guitarists like Jimmy Page and Jorma have used it all over their acoustic work. Okay, so we'll start by making sure we have the right grip on the pick. I tend to actually hold my pick with two fingers like this, so I adjust it if I'm going to be hybrid picking to the more traditional grip style. And you're going to be picking downstrokes with your pick and then using your middle and your ring finger, which are notated M and A, to pick other notes. So for example 1, we're just going to start with at the open D position, just the root, fifth and root, and we're going to pick down on the D, up with our middle finger on the A, and then with our ring finger on the D. So here's example 1A. Here's example 1B. We're going to take the same 3 notes, but rather than going quarter notes against eighth notes, we're going to do all eighth notes, which gives a little bit of rhythmic displacement. And slowly. In example 1C, we're just going to reverse the pattern, so we're going to be starting with our ring finger and then moving downward. Example 1D is going to be parallel to 1B. We're just taking all eighth notes now and reversing the pattern. Example 1E, we're going to alternate pick notes against notes played with our fingers. So example 1E sounds like. And example 1F just reverses that. Example 1G, we're going to be moving the notes up on the second half of the measure. So it starts off. In example 1H, we're going to start using simultaneous picks and fingers at the same time. So it's going to be simultaneous on the first and on the third beat. So in all of these first examples, the idea is just to start getting used to the feeling of using your fingers and your pick at the same time. What's cool about it is that there are 2 ways to approach it, in terms of you can accentuate the natural tonal differences between the pick and the fingers, or you can try to balance it. And I suggest trying to do both because they'll have different applications. But as with anything, really use your ears and make sure that the sounds that you're getting are the sounds that you're intending. Example 2, we're going to start exploring pedal points, and that's where you have a repeated note against moving other notes. So what we're going to do is we're going to take again the same basic D major open chord, and we're going to have consistent upper notes with a slightly moving bass line. This is a good time to possibly try exploring the difference in the sound of the pick versus the fingers, because then you can kind of get a sense of polyphony, almost like it's 2 different voices. So example 2. Again. So a really cool thing about hybrid picking is that it allows for totally differently spaced chord voicings. You can almost think like a pianist. Your pick can be playing much lower notes with your fingers playing higher notes, and you'll get the simultaneous sounding of them without having notes in between, if that's the sound you're going for. Example 3 is a progression in E minor, where you're going to be playing all of the basses with your pick and all of the treble voices with your fingers. This is example 3. So hybrid picking pairs perfectly with a lot of the elements in the typical blues vocabulary. In this one, we're going to be looking at some moving sixths, and you want to hold them down together. You can add a little bit of vibrato to make them sound a little bit more in tune, a little bit more bluesy. And then the second half of the example, we're going to be using hybrid picking within the single notes. This is example 4. Hybrid picking can also be really handy in leads. It can make certain lines more easy, and it can also give certain lines a characteristic flavor. In example 5A, we have something that sounds kind of bluegrass, and though you could play it at a much faster tempo, I suggest starting slowly and really exploring the differences in the sound of the fingers and the pick. This is example 5A. In example 5B, we're going to use hybrid picking on a line that might be difficult to pick in a more traditional alternate way. This is example 5B. In example 5B, I recommend splitting it up into 2 sections because even though we have consistent 16th notes, I have them in different groupings. So we have a group of 5 predominantly in the first measure, and then groups of 3 predominantly in the second measure. So I recommend getting used to the different groupings and then moving on to the next measure. So the first measure, that's a group of 5. And work on those groups. And after you get comfortable with the groups of 5, then take it to the next measure with the groups mostly of 3. You have a couple of 2s in there, but mostly it's groupings of 3. So these examples just barely scratch the surface of all the tons of ways you can use hybrid picking. With anything, I always recommend trying to write with it yourself, trying to come up with new ideas, because the idea with any new technique is you want it to be able to become part of your automatic musical vocabulary. And I bet that the more you use hybrid picking, the more applications you'll find for it.